Amica Ferrer-Gotic, this is N1 International News. One of the first international teams ever led in Myanmar after the crackdown is CNN's international correspondent Clarissa Ward with her crew. Clarissa is joining us from London. Clarissa, welcome to N1. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Getting into a country like Myanmar is everything but easy. Would you take us through the process of being a journalist and getting into a country and still managing to be there? And give us the latest on the situation in Yangon, Myanmar, since you and the teams, like I said, were the first international crew to fly in since the military takeover on February 1st.
So sometimes as journalists, the only way we can get into a country where there's extreme violence on the ground is through the actual regime or perpetrators of that violence. And this was the case with this situation. We went in with permission, with visas that were granted by the military junta that ousted Myanmar's democratically elected government 2 months ago and has subsequently issued a brutal crackdown. More than 700 people killed, among them more than 40 children, nearly 3,000 people arrested. And that meant that our movements were tightly controlled because obviously the military junta did not want us to tell the truth about what was happening in Myanmar. Nonetheless, we were still able to see glimpses of that. We confronted or found when we went to shoot in a market very brave people who came up to us and said, even though they could see that we were surrounded by the military, they said, listen, we live in fear. We're not safe here. We want democracy. So it was an extraordinarily difficult in many ways and challenging visit, but also ultimately a rewarding one as well, because we did feel that we were able to tell those stories, and we were also able to sit down with Myanmar's top military leadership and confront them about the brutality they have been meting out to this pro-democracy protest movement.
And Clarissa, what are the toughest moments that you have recorded in Yangon? Like you said, Myanmar security forces have killed over 700 civilians, leaving desperate anti-coup protesters to call on the United Nations to intervene. That's 710 by this morning. Like I said, what are the biggest struggles for this country, and what are those toughest moments that you have recorded and you've been through during your time in Myanmar?
I think, some of the toughest moments were talking to these people who approached us in this market and hearing their pleas for the outside world to listen. Hearing one woman actually said to me, talking about the military, they're not human. They're not human. And that really stayed with me. I couldn't forget it. And of course, it's important to say that after talking to us, some of these people were detained. The police actually detained at least 10 people, 5 of whom had spoken to us. Now, we were able to lobby very hard behind the scenes and ensure that they were released, and we continue to be in touch with them. But this is clearly a desperate situation where people are being thrown in jail or detained simply for telling the world that they want a better future, that they want democracy, that they're not willing to accept a return to what one woman called the Dark Ages. And those words of those extraordinarily courageous people have really stayed with me.
Clarissa, did you or anyone from your crew ever felt endangered or threatened during that time?
I don't think we were very lucky because we're there with the military, because there was a lot of public eyes on our visit. It gives us a measure of protection. What I felt far more concerned about, and still do feel more concerned about, are the local journalists on the ground and the activists who are risking their lives every day to bring the world pictures, video, editorial information about the brutality that is going on in Myanmar. They don't have the level of protection that we enjoyed. So while we were relatively secure on this trip, even though it was incredibly tense at times, there are many others in Myanmar doing incredibly important work who do not have the luxury of that security at all.
Freedom of speech in Myanmar remains an issue as 29 journalists in Myanmar remain in detention, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners monitoring group. Why was and is still important to keep Myanmar in the international news, Clarissa?
Because this isn't a situation where an uprising that has some minimal public support has just spontaneously occurred. This was a country that for the last decade had enjoyed a taste of freedom, a taste of democracy, and people loved it. And they want to preserve it, they want to keep it, and the military does not have any popular support. And this is what makes it very different from other conflicts that I've covered, from what I've seen on the ground and from what I've seen through the journalism coming from inside Myanmar. Simply put, the military does not have the support of its own people. The people want a return to the status quo 3 months ago. They want to have their democracy back again. They want to see the results of the November election honored, and they want an end to this brutal military repression once and for all.
And now is Myanmar in the news, but Myanmar hit headlines 4 years ago in 2017 in December with the largest ethnic cleansing operation of Rohingya Muslim minority. Those are the UN data. Aung San Suu Kyi found herself being criticized by the international public. Even then, Suu Kyi faced a raft of criminal charges now that could see her barred for life from office. I would like you to have your take on this.
Look, I think you have to understand that Aung San Suu Kyi was in a very difficult position. Clearly, her position was always tenuous, as we now see from the results of the coup. It may well be the case that she felt she had to publicly pay lip service or try to diminish the brutality of the military's actions against the Rohingya Muslims because she knew that she would be jeopardizing her position if she did not. But whatever the past was, whatever the sort of apologies that were made for unacceptable and atrocious acts against the Rohingya Muslims, it doesn't change the reality of what's going on today, which is that Aung San Suu Kyi and her party won a landslide victory in November's election. And instead of being catapulted into a position of further power as a result of that, she is under house arrest. Her people and her followers and the people of Myanmar are facing an extraordinarily brutal crackdown. That's what's important, and that's what the international community, I think people in Myanmar would really like to see them focus on.
And this is why your work as well is so important, to have this information come out in the international news. We don't see that very often. Will you be returning to Myanmar? Have you thought about that?
I would love very much to return to Myanmar. I don't think we'll be getting another invitation or another visa, rather, from the military anytime soon, because obviously our report was very critical. But you can believe that we will continue telling the story, not just me, all my colleagues at CNN who are in Thailand, in Hong Kong, covering this story from every angle, and that's something we will continue to do.
Clarissa, thank you very much for joining us at N1. Thank you. CNN's international correspondent Clarissa Ward was with us. I'm Mika Ferrer-Gotic. Thank you for watching.